like an instrument. If I'm looking for a type of instrument, what instrument would probably be sampled?
Guitar.
Guitar.
Drums.
Okay. So really anything, right?
Yeah.
Saxophone, guitar, drums, piano. What's an example of? So that's the difference of sample. A good way to explain it, I always say it's we're taking pre-recorded audio and we're spreading it across our keyboard and we're playing it. Okay. I think the best example, and you'll see what I mean by this and when I talk about it. The best example of synthetic versus sampled is piano. Okay. If I have a piano sound, when it's sampled, what did I do?
Recorded it.
I recorded the piano. I went over the piano, I pressed middle C, and I recorded it most likely at multiple velocities. I drop it in a sampler, which we'll talk about next week or the week after that. And when I hit C, it plays a C. When I hit D, it stretches it, and it makes it a D. Okay, that's sampled. When I get to synthetic, it's basically, it's like a fake representation of that. So synthetic typically tries to do two things. Sometimes it tries to represent real world instruments. And then, most of the time, creates new sounds. What do you think synthetic does best out of those two? New sounds, okay? So here's what's funny. If you've never seen it before in my office, I have a keyboard that's called a Juno 60. It's a very old synthesizer. It doesn't even have MIDI on it. It was made before MIDI was created. And it has some of the best sounds you'll ever hear on it. But what's funny is the way I got it is the guy that gave it to me bought it for his daughter so his daughter could learn to play piano. She got it and she put it up and she's like, Dad, there's no piano sounds on this. The piano sounds are awful. So he ended up giving it to me and I think he bought her something else. The reason there's no piano sounds on it is that's not a sampling keyboard. It's merely a synthesizer. So if you go to Operator, and you guys will hopefully see some of this and get this. If I'm looking for a really realistic piano sound that responds really well to how hard or soft I play, I'm probably not going to go to Operator. Because Operator is a synth. It's not a sampler. It's not taking recordings of a piano and stretching them across the keyboard. It's a synthesizer that's going to allow me to create new sounds. Now that being said, okay, why does there a piano and keys for? Well, you can see there's all these different key sounds. And you'll see today as we work through this, because of the way waves work and the things we can do to the oscillators, we can get pretty close to some sounds. So before we got into sampled sounds, like my Juno 60 has sounds that sound kind of like an organ. And depending on how you EQ them and how you use them, they can work. A lot of synths represent, I should have you guys do this one. If anything, look through it. Where is it? Brass? There should be a brass for it.
Right there.
Yeah.
Underneath bass.
Bass.
Like,
Retarded.
keep going bleep, and then right under it.
Bass.
Bleep.
Bleep. Brass. There we go. Synth brass. Okay. So synthesizers are really great at creating cheesy, synthy horn sounds. But there's almost a lot of times with synthetic stuff and with synths, it does kind of create, sometimes when you try to represent a real world instrument, you get this new sound in itself. So like a synth horn sound is very 80s. It's like you listen to a Killer's record, you hear these bright synths that almost sound like horn stuff, but they sound good in the right context. So the purpose of this whole class and everything we're doing is I want you guys to understand how to create sounds, and I want you to understand sounds so that depending on the situation you're in, you can create and use a sound that's appropriate. Like we talked about in Guitar Lab a lot of times, there's not necessarily good and bad guitar tone. There's appropriate tone and there's unappropriate tone. So depending on the context, a fake like trumpet sound may be exactly what I need. I did a track at Christmas time for the communications department. They did this Bible gift box video. And Micah Mueller said, yeah, I want this track that can go with it, but it should be like really upbeat and really happy. So I found this awful. It's probably one of those in there, synth like trumpet sound. But it was exactly what I wanted. It's a terrible patch, and if someone heard it, they're like, oh, I got a way better sampled trumpet sound. I don't want a sampled trumpet sound. I want a fake sounding trumpet, right? So it all depends on what you're going for. So Operator is an example of a synthetic sound. If we look through Live's instruments folder, there's a few different synthetic sounds, right? Analog, collision, electric, Operator, intention are all examples of synthetic sounds. So read through the manual and look through what all those things different do. The two things we'll primarily spend time with in this class is Operator and then Sampler. Like collision represents things that are struck, so there's lots of cool bell sounds. Electric is like electric pianos. Tension is things that are plucked, so it's guitar sounds. So like Jordan gave the example of a sampled sound would probably be an acoustic guitar. But if you go to tension, it's called physical modeling, so it actually does all this cool, crazy math stuff and models, like when a guitar string is plucked, what algorithm, and all this crazy crap, and it tries to represent it. I'm not smart enough to deal with that. So we go to operator, which is very, very simple and very easy. So, has anyone ever used operator and messed with it? Cool, like 2 people, that's great. You guys are going to love it by the end of today. Literally, in like 15 minutes worth of this, you'll understand enough to make the best sounds in the world. So, operator uses a type of synthesis that's called FM synthesis, which means frequency modulation. That's just a big fancy way to say all 4 of these guys modulate or adjust each other. So you get these really, really rich, complex sounds. And when we're talking about synthesis, our initial starting point is something that's called an oscillator. Okay, so what an oscillator does is it generates sound. We classify that sound in types of waves. Okay. So, yeah, you guys have all heard this before probably at some point. But an oscillator is going to generate a type of sound wave. Depending on what type of sound wave it generates, gives us different sounds. Now, let's look at the, let me go off base for a second. Let's look at we're going to keep going. I don't want to say you guys. So let's start here. If we look at operator, this whole section is where we're going to start. Okay. Oh, that's annoying with the projector. Okay, so everyone put your mouse in this section, okay, where it says A here, and click. So what we should see is this bottom portion here turns white. We get this whole area here that's going to give us some info on it. But what these 4 things are called here are called oscillators. Okay? So again, we have 4 oscillators and operators. So that gives us the chance to generate 4 different waves that can all affect each other the way all of these work. So let's go through all these. If I press this A button, someone press that really quickly. What does it do? Turns it off. Okay, so we can turn off the oscillators we're not using if we want. It doesn't affect anything unless they're running into each other. But I can press that A and turn it on and off. Level adjusts the level of this oscillator. So really quickly, let's just listen to mine. Just going to play a note here. Okay. Right? So that's the level. I'm just hearing this oscillator. Now watch what happens. I'm going to go to oscillator B, C, and D and start turning up the level. And what's happening is this oscillator is feeding into this one, which is then affecting this one and affecting this one. So watch what happens as I play this note and start messing with levels. Right? Completely different sound than what we started with. The reason it sounds different is it's all morphing and it's all changing based on the other ones. Does that make sense? What's cool, sometimes the best sounds you'll make, just literally play a chord and start turning crap until it sounds right. Like, don't think, oh, it's got to be this calculation, it's got to be this percent. Just turn, listen, use your ear. You'll find some really cool stuff. Now, a few things with this before we move on. That fix button, does anyone know what that means? This guy right here.
It means it's not going to move.
What? Yeah, you got it, but I'm going to pause you before you say the next word, which you're probably trying to think of what is the next word. But when I do this, and then I go to here, what happened? Explain to me what happened from here to here. That changed the pitch, okay? Watch what happens when I press fix. The pitch isn't changing, right? The pitch is fixed now. Why would I ever have the pitch fixed?
Like drum sounds maybe?
Drum sounds, right? We hit a kick drum, it maybe will flex and pitch a little bit, but it's not like dom 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 dom. Like you're not playing halfway the timpani, that's a different subject. But so what you guys will see when you do the percussion stuff and you try to fake drum sounds using operator this week, you're going to find some really cool sounds. The sounds you guys will be able to create are killer. But you'll find most of those, the pitch has been fixed on it. Okay, so it's like taking a pet to get fixed. Never mind. I don't want to go down. It's about to get PG up in here. Okay, these 2 buttons here, fine and coarse, those adjust the tuning or the pitch of the oscillator. So the good way to think of this is if I'm playing my low E string on my guitar, and I turn my tuning peg, right, I'm adjusting the fine pitch of that E string. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm playing my E string and I put a capo on the 3rd fret, I just adjusted the course of it, right? It's a big adjustment. So let's listen to it. Right? That's 1 octave. So I went, this is in cents, so I went from 0 to 1,000 cent, which is an octave higher. And you can hear that change. Right? If I go to chorus, right? So you can hear that difference. Chorus is a big adjustment. It's putting our capo on. Fine is tuning our tuning peg. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Good. So let's talk about this, and then we'll talk about the different waves. So here's our 4 different oscillators. Now what's cool about operator, by default, this affects this, which affects this, which affects this. But we have tons and tons of flexibility. So if we hop over to the right side, everyone click here. Okay? So we want to see this section turn white, which will look like this. And we'll see this change, right? So we see our display change. This is like our master control section for operator. So this is my overall volume for the entire instrument. This is my tone switch, which if you put your mouse over, I think it tells you like to help with digital aliasing or whatever it is. Sometimes higher up you get this weird kind of gritty sound. That can help with that. Time, you can adjust that for everything. And again, we won't do a whole lot here besides a few things, and I have you guys make notes. But you see this little guy here, this little sign. This is all of our oscillators. Okay, so right now, this algorithm that it's using is using an algorithm where oscillator A runs into B to C to D. Okay, but let's try this. Right, and that's a completely different sound than the one I had before, which is great. I haven't added any effects, just 4 oscillators. So I have these 4 running into each other. If I go back here, we can see this is the algorithm we're using. Watch what happens from here to there. So what happened now,
Whoa.
someone explain that to me. There's 2 words I'm looking for. Let's see if you guys, well, just say whatever. But there's 2 words that are going to describe what happened here.
The order of the squares that it hits.
Yeah, so what's happening, this is a term, write this down. This is we won't specifically talk about this in class. These 2 terms, serial, parallel. Serial processing is guitar pedals, right? Overdrive, delay, reverb. This signal where, let's say this is overdrive. This is verb, this is delay. So I'm adding delay and reverb on top of my overdriven signal. Make sense? Serial processing. One affects the other. If I turn this overdrive off, now what do I have? I have a clean sound that has verb and delay on it. As opposed to, that's a good example. Let's just say electric guitar signal, straight to the board. It's a clean signal. And then I also have a chain coming from my pedal board. Right? So I have 2 signals. They're running parallel to each other. This signal does not affect this signal. Okay? So I always have a clean signal for my guitar, then maybe my effects are coming here, and that could change. Now what's happening, these are ran in serial, which means one is affecting the other one. Make sense? Somewhat? This is parallel, which means these are all running. We're hearing these 4 independently, but kind of mixed in together. So what's happening is out of operator, initially we have A going to B, which then goes to C and goes to D. And we hear it all blended together. Okay? And it comes out here. What's happening in this case is we hear A, B, C, and D. And then after the fact, all those independent signals are ran into one, but they're not affecting each other.
It's interesting that you draw them backwards.
Yeah, I should have drawn it the way they did it. But does that make sense? So you can see the way it's running. I should have drawn it that way. As I was drawing it, I was like, but this is serial. They're running into each other. This one is them separate. Now, let's play a little math game. Or not math game. Let's play visual recognition. If I go into this one, okay, I love whiteboards, but when they have these lines on it, it's stupid. So when I go to this algorithm, look on your screen if it's hard to see. Tell me what oscillators we hear independently, and then what oscillator affects another oscillator.
A and B are independent.
Yeah.
C runs with the D.
Yeah.
D, B, and A mix. Is that what you hear?
Just this guy right here.
Huh?
Right? So A is separate, B is there, and then C affects D. And so when we hear this signal, we're hearing a blend of those two oscillators. Right? Go to this one. Okay? We hear oscillator A is affecting oscillator B, but then it gets split, and we hear the two separate blends. So we hear A and B affecting C, and we hear A and B affecting D separately. Enough of the philosophical stuff. This week, like, find a sound and then just change it. And what's going to be cool is, again, we haven't used any effects. We're just using volumes here, and then we have, I think it's, what, 8 or something? Different options for algorithms here that we can select. And the sound's going to change depending on the way those are ran. So just mess with that. You just need to understand that's what's happening. You don't have to know the math behind it or whatever, even know serial or parallel. But kind of understand what's happening there. Any questions? Yeah.
So that one that the mouse is over right now, it's only outputting from D and not B?
It's outputting from A, B, and then the blend of C and D. Yeah. This is outputting, oh Lord, what is that? I guess that's
A and B and then C and D at the same time.
No, it's because that's what that guy is. I don't know. Read the manual. They're smart. But the point is, we have, once we get this set and we like it, still go through and change it, right? Everybody get that much? Yeah. Here's the other things we need to make a note on. Go to, if you have a keyboard, you get your operator sound that sounds like perfect. Nobody has a keyboard big enough in here, I don't think, right now. That has a mod wheel on it, or a pitch wheel. See all these options here? We can have our mod wheel affect different things. So I can go to mod wheel, and I can select filter frequency. When I turn my mod wheel, if this amount A is set to 100, or whatever value I want, as I turn my mod wheel, it's going to modulate the filter frequency of operator. Okay? So again, most of us, when we think of presets, we just pull up a sound, we're like, oh, this is a good sound. Most of us, when we're creating sounds, we just create a static sound, and we're like, oh, this is cool, it's a dead mouse sound. But the sounds that we hear that we really like are sounds that have lots of modulation and a lot of movement. So you create a pad patch, and it sounds really great, but assign the mod wheel so when you go from the verse to the chorus, it gets brighter, right? We don't want the same sound the whole time, typically. But then the other thing, the mod wheel here could also control something else, which is kind of cool. So I could go in and have it controlling the filter frequency and the volume of oscillator A at 25%. Everybody get this? These are all options. Velocity, how hard or soft I hit it. Key, whatever key I hit, so as I go up the keyboard, it's going to affect the filter maybe. Aftertouch, if you have a keyboard that you press the key and then it's like you kind of lean into it, that's called aftertouch. You can have that effect. Something pitch bend, your pitch bend will, your mod will. You can have that affect all that different stuff, which is pretty cool. So make a note of, if you have a keyboard that has that, create a sound, assign your mod wheel or your pitch wheel, or your velocity or key, and see how you can do it. You create patches that respond and don't just stay the same, which is really, really nice. Two things I want everyone to, well, let's say one thing I want everyone to write down. Right here, voices, okay? Circle that, make a note. As we go throughout the class, we'll talk about different types of sounds using operator to create different types of patches, different sounds. Voices basically, voices is going to give us the option of how many different notes. If I play 6 notes at a time, all 6 of those notes are going to ring out. As soon as I hit that 7th note, it's going to kill one of those 6 voices and replace it with that note I hit. The higher it's called polyphony. The higher polyphony, or the higher amount of notes that ring out at once that happen, then the more CPU processing that's going to happen. So if you have a piano sound, we're probably not going to use operator for a piano sound because only 20 notes can ring out at the same time, right? You're not going to play a Bach piece and do arpeggio or something and have all those notes ring out. In what kind of scenario would I switch my voices to one where I only hear one voice at a time?
Either like a synth bass or like a beat line.
Yeah. So if we think of a Moog synthesizer, and please pronounce it properly, Moog, not Moog. It's not Moog, it's Moog. If you have a Moog synthesizer, these classic Moog synthesizers, people pay thousands of dollars for them to hear one note at a time, right? But it's the best bass sound you've ever heard. Those are called monosynths. So this allows us to create a monosynth, one sound, no flipping. Yeah, so that's all I really want you guys to know about this. Now let's dig into it. We have a few minutes left. So leave this set to 6 now, but this week experiment with that. Oh wait, there is one other thing. Oh, we'll get to that in a second. Experiment with that and what types of different sounds you can get. So let's clean this up. And any questions so far? Operator's so fun. I love teaching people about operating. You can tell this is one of the first classes all year I've been pissed off. So. I'm a very happy person. I just don't like people very much. Yeah. So if you're working along with me, you can actually do this with me. But make sure to take lots of notes. So we're just going to deal with one oscillator right now. Remember, we went through all these examples. We're going to have tons of sounds, no effects. But let's go back to just the one oscillator. So if we look at this. Now again, this is a basics of synthesis kind of thing, so we have to mention a few things. Let's start here, this oscillator section. Where it says wave here, we have the ability to select what type of wave that oscillator is generating. Now if you read the manual, and if you want to go further, read the live manual on this section. It's really in-depth on operator. But if we click this menu here, we see all these different options that we get. The cool thing about this, everyone pull up and go to... click Saw D, okay? So when I go to Saw D, you see this section here. This is my default, oh, come on. Thank you. This is my default sawtooth wave, okay? But what I can do is I can go in and write this and make it exactly like I want it to sound. And have certain harmonics ring out and certain harmonics not. So again, no effects, I can just have one oscillator, pull up my wave, tweak it, make it custom, and that gets me to user, okay? Or we could go down to user and select that. So even within me giving you just these preset sounds, there's still so much flexibility to adjust this. So let's look at our different types of waves. Let's start at the very beginning, which is a sine wave. I love that they didn't add the E there, so it looks like the sin wave. So let's pull up our sin wave. And I'm just going to play one note like we did before. Okay? And I want you guys to describe that sound to me. What does that sound like to you?
A sine.
What?
I'm going to say a sine wave.
Sounds like a sine wave. So explain a sine wave to me. Now here's the other thing. When you pull up the wave, it shows you a picture of what it looks like. So it's going to give you a good representation of that sound. Give me some words to represent that. So we described food like, oh, it was spicy or it was rich.
It's clean. That was
Clean.
Kind of a blank slate.
Bland.
Soft.
Hollow.
No.
Soft.
Very intrusive.
I would say it's smooth,
Yeah, I remember that.
like a baby's bottom. Is it very bright?
No.
No.
Clean.
Dull.
It's like dull or warm.
It's
Yeah.
dopey.
Dopey. What is dopey?
Okay, now here's the other thing. What does that sound like instrument-wise?
Almost like a Rhodes piano.
Okay, there's a few options here. Justin says, let's say electric piano. What else could it sound like?
Greatest instrument.
So watch this.
Organ.
Kind of electric piano-ish.
Organy.
Now what happens?
Bass.
Sounds like a bass. All I did is switch octaves. Okay. What was someone else said? Another one?
Organ.
Organ. Depending on where I am, it could sound like an organ. Okay. So there's our sine wave. So if we're working in operator and we need a sound, we're working with Doug, and he says, I need an organ patch, or I need a sound, something that's going to glue it together, something that's not going to be too bright. We might want to start with the sine wave. Okay. So let's go to our next one. And go to Saw D. Okay? And listen to that. Okay, how would we describe that?
Like a horn.
The sad thing is I almost wrote horny. Horn-like.
Horn-like.
Okay?
Brassy, bright.
Right, that's the word I'm looking for.
Gross.
It's bitey, has a bite to it, right?
Vibrant.
Yeah, that's good. Those are good words. You can see kind of this wave. It's not a good representation But if this is a sawtooth wave, see it's smooth, or if this is a sine wave, our sawtooth wave is a little more bitey. Like it has big peaks like that.
Like a saw.
Does that make sense? So we can hear the difference. It's a lot brighter. Okay, let's go to our next one. Square. This is one of my favorites. So we go to square. Play the same note we've always played.
Which square?
Whoa.
Same
Square
notes.
D.
Square D. How do we describe that?
It's almost like a combination of both.
Not yet. We'll get to one that's like a combination. It kind of, somewhat, but there'll be one in a second that's more like that.
Sounds like there's like divots in this.
Give me just a simple sound. I'm an idiot. I don't know anything. Give me words like you've used before. Bright, soft.
Doorbell.
So they're kind of like a doorbell.
Alarm.
What's the thing that it really sounds like? Think old school.
8-bit.
8-bit, like video games.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I need to learn the Mario theme song so that when we pull up the sound, I can always play it and people get it. Is it bright or warm?
Right.
Bright, but it's not as bright as what?
Not as bright as saw.
Yeah, so it's like kind of in between, right? And again, if we think about this, square wave goes up, but it doesn't have as big of a peak as a saw wave does, right? We can kind of visually see that. This is saw, this is square. So it's bright, but it's not as bright as our sawtooth wave. Now, let's go to what Justin was talking about. Triangle. Although I do have to agree with you. But this is the better. Okay, so now if we listen to this, what does that sound like?
Like a warm version of the last one.
Yeah, so it's warm, but then it's not as warm as this, right? It's kind of in between. I always like to say it's almost like a combination of a sine wave and a sawtooth wave, or a sine wave and a square wave. So if we play that, it's a little bitier, but it's not as bitey as our sawtooth wave. It's a little warm, but it's not as warm as our sine wave. Does that make sense to everybody? Go to our last one. There's still these. Go to noise looped. Now we press that. What is that?
White noise.
Static.
White noise. Yeah, so static. Okay. What's interesting is like my kids, to help them get to sleep sometimes. The little girl Lily often. We'll turn on a white noise app on our phone, and she falls asleep to that. And the reason she falls asleep to that is it's a constant sound, right? And it reminds them of what it sounds like in the womb. This constant noise kind of constantly happening. So that's what noise is. It's kind of that staticky sound. We won't really deal with this. If you use white noise in any of your patches, in like the first 4 or 5 weeks of class, you get an F. I mean, how many? Now, I will say I have heard worship leaders create pad patches, and they're like, check out this sweet pad I have, and it's like, and it just sounds awful. I'm like, no, dude, take the white noise out. But there are some really, really, really cool uses of white noise that we will be using later on. Okay. So these are different types of waves. So go back to saw D. Man, I wish there was more time in this stupid class. We always run out of time. I always talk way too much. That doesn't help you. But a few other options we'll hit, and then we're done. If we go to a sawtooth wave, or know what these types of sounds are like. This is like the starting point. You don't have to know how to circuit bend. You don't have to know all this in-depth stuff. The starting point is you hear a sound, and you try to think, does it sound like a sine tooth wave? Sine tooth. Does it sound like a sine wave? Does it sound like a sawtooth wave? Does it sound like triangle? You'll hear a lot of Fireflies, the Owl City song, that lead patch, sine wave, right? DJ Got Us Falling in Love Again, that chord patch, sawtooth, right? You'll hear those patches. You'll hear bright. It's one of these two probably, maybe this one. If it's something that sounds like a really smooth lead sound that's very legato, probably sine wave, okay? So start messing with that. If you can start to associate these sounds with what they are, then you have a really good starting place. 4 things really quickly within here. Switch to a sawtooth wave. We need to talk about these terms: attack, decay, sustain, and release. Okay? Attack. When I play this, in a adjust that, or I can adjust the individual line. I'm kind of mapping it. What's happening to it?
Taking away the initial like
Attack.
hit.
Yeah, initial hit. It's swelling into it, right? If I'm a guitar player, instead of just playing, I'm swelling in with my volume pedal. Now, attack, kind of a later attack, or delayed attack is good for a pad. What's bad for a pad, typically?
Really
Yeah, no attack, but then...
aggressive.
Too much.
Sorry. Yeah, you're
Too
probably...
long of a release.
Yeah, so let's look at attack first, okay? So attack is I hit this, and it takes a while to get to it. That's a little drastic. So I can move this up, or I can just move this. This line is a visual representation of that. Okay, let's look down here before. See initial? If I take that and bring that up, that's giving me the initial, the starting point of that wave, right? So when I hit it, is it starting at 0 dB, or is it starting at -20 and going up? That's a different sound than that should be, than that, right? So pads normally don't have that initial hit. We want a little bit of a fade in there. But then the thing Justin said, this is great, we don't want pads that have this. If I take release, crank that all the way up, listen to what happens now. Not good. So if your release hangs out really long, then what's going to happen is I change chords. That last chord is going to ring into my next chord. So if I bring this down to a decent level, and you can hear when I let go, no release is this. It stops instantaneously. With a little release, right? It almost sounds like reverb, kind of how it's coming off, which is nice. Decay basically is saying how soon after I hit that initial attack level is it going to drop down to my sustaining level. Okay. Sustain, when I take this and bring it down, what am I doing to the sound? I'm cutting the sustain from the sound, right? So a good thing is you can kind of look at this. Attack is, when I hit this note, it's going to take a while to get here. Once I get to here, the space between here and here is my decay. So as soon as I get to this level, it's going to decay down to whatever my sustain level is. When my sustain is low, it's like playing a note on guitar and it goes instead of and rings out, right? As I bring sustain up, but that's kind of a cool sound. Again, it all depends on what we're looking for. But mess with your attack, decay, sustain, and release. Again, no effects so far. Just waves, 4 oscillators, adjusting the attack, decay, sustain, and release when we've gotten that. Okay, make sense so far? Good. We have a few more things. I know we're running late. Give me to like 3:40, maybe 3:45, if you can make it, and we'll wrap up. So those are our oscillators. 4 different types of oscillators. For each of these oscillators, we can have different types of waves. Each one, we can have a sine wave, a saw for this, noise. We can blend the level, and it all affects each other. Unless we go to that algorithm that was over here that's all of them separate. For each of these waves, we can adjust the envelope to where when we hit it, the wave doesn't initially come in. It kind of fades into it, or the release is a little longer for each of these separately, which is killer. I mean, the amount of control we can have over that is really, really cool. Let's move over to this guy. This section here, LFO. Does anyone know what LFO stands for? And don't say cheesy boy band from the 90s.
Low frequency oscillator.
Yes, also not to be confused with LMFAO. Low frequency oscillator. So how many oscillators does operator have? 6. No? We have 4 plus 5. Okay, this LFO, low frequency oscillator. What this means is this is another oscillator that's generating sounds, but it's generating it at such a low frequency that we can't hear it. But we're going to use this. There's one big word that LFO goes with, modulate. Did you say bass?
You said wobble.
Wobble bass. Yes, it very much goes with wobble bass. Good job, my son. Good job. So an LFO is used to modulate other sounds. Now, depending on what an LFO modulates, gives us different types of effects. Okay. So everyone, well, just listen. I'm going to press this, turn my LFO on, and this is what I get. Let me just. That's awesome. We got fart sounds. Okay? Kind of a cool, interesting sound. have here, this LFO is currently set to modulate something. We'll talk about what it's modulating in a second. Let's go through all these different options. I'm going to stay here. These are my different types of waves that I can get: sine, square, triangle, saw up, saw down, sample and hold, and noise. Again, don't like read the manual and go, I wonder what a sawtooth wave is. Switch it to it and see how it affects it. Okay? LFO, we can adjust our type of wave. We can adjust the rate, low, high, or sync. Watch what happens when we change this to sync. David will like this as the dubstep guy. It changes to a rate. So I get 16th notes, 8th notes, whatever, as I change that. Instead of being hertz, this now switches to a rate. This button here, re-trigger, if you're doing like tremolo, which we'll do in a second, when you guys are creating your own pad patches, you guys will be messing with this. You're going to want to turn it off, because what happens is every time I play a new note, that LFO is going to re-trigger. So if I have a tremolo going, I want that tremolo to stay going constantly throughout me playing chords. I don't want it to be going like this, and then as soon as I go to another one, it stops and restarts. I want it to go consistently. So we'll probably turn that off. Then rate, obviously, if we switch this to sync, which I'll suggest you guys probably go to sync so you see like a rhythmic value and note value to work with. We're all musicians here, and some of us are drummers that have a little bit of drummers to see. On the count of 3, everyone scream. 1, 2, 3. Good. So we can set our rate to whatever value you want to. That's a note value if it's set to sync. And then amount, obviously, is going to adjust it. How much is that LFO affecting our whatever parameter we've set it to? Make sense? So now, let's break it down. Right now, the reason this sounds so funny is because my LFO, this right here, as soon as we click this, we get a whole new set of options. Don't be confused by this looking the same. This allows me to adjust the attack, decay, sustain, release, initial attack on my LFO, right? So let me show you the difference here. If I click this, see what I did here with this wave? If I go to LFO, I get a whole new envelope. So I can completely change the attack, decay, sustain, release on my LFO. But the other thing I can do is define what destination or what my LFO is modulating. Oh, right now, A, B, C, and D, this is set to modulate those oscillators, to modulate the pitch of them. That's why we get this change in pitch. Now that sounds a little crazy, but if I go to a more subtle oscillation, it's hard to represent. But when LFO modulates pitch, what effect do we get? Vibrato. Think about singing. If you sing a note, when you add vibrato to your note, what are you doing?
Changing the pitch.
Changing up and down in pitch. Now, we're not changing in a coarse value. We're changing in a fine value, right? We're adding some life to it. We're breathing. So we're modulating our pitch at a low rate, and a small amount gives us vibrato. Some people have a nice vibrato. Some people have a vibrato that sounds like the sound we heard earlier. We tell them not to do it, okay? So we turn our LFO on. Make sure it's turned on. We define what destination it modulates. So we turn A, B, C, and D off. And we get no change in our sound because it's currently not set to modulate anything. We can also modulate our filter, which isn't currently turned on, and we'll talk about it in a second. So even if we got that turned on here, if our filter is not turned on, it's not going to change anything. I'll turn it on so you guys can hear. So we start to get David's favorite wobble bass when we're modulating our filter. But the thing I want to modulate, go to destination B, get all these different options like we saw before. If I go to volume, I set my rate to 112. When LFO modulates volume, what do we get? And make sure you guys are writing this down because you will not remember it, I promise you. When our LFO modulates volume, what's that effect, Bob? Guitar players.
Tremolo?
Tremolo. So, let's think in hypotheticals really quickly. What wave did we say sounded like electric piano? Sine. So if I go to a sine tooth, if I go to a Seinfeld wave, I go to sine, right? I pull it up, I go to LFO, I set my rate to 112, which would probably be lower. I set it to modulate my volume, have my amount. It's kind of a nice little Rhodes patch, right? And I would probably tweak it, have it a little differently. Oh, my filter's on it. Gives me a nice little Rhodes patch with my LFO there. So LFO modulating pitch gives us vibrato, LFO modulating volume gives us tremolo, LFO modulating pan. Just guess, if LFO modulates pan, what is it doing? Panning. Auto, we could say, could almost be like a Leslie, or the Doppler effect or whatever. We'll just call it panning, or auto pan. If you're not in stereo, these two sound very similar, right? The pan and the tremolo sound very similar. But again, we can turn our LFO on, we can set it to rate, amount, have different destinations. It can modulate pitch, it can modulate filter, and a volume here. Rate and key in this amount and velocity. If I turn this up, then depending on how hard I hit the note, depends on how much the LFO will affect the sound. So it says amount is controlled, basically says amount is controlled by velocity. So this, if I set it to 100 and play really soft on my key, I'm not going to hear much from the LFO, which the LFO would affect volume, which would give me tremolo. If I dig in really hard, it's going to give me, this amount's going to bump up, and it's going to give me more tremolo. So mess with that stuff as you can. And again, we can adjust the envelope for that LFO really easily and get us a completely new, different sound. If you're confused, make a note to mess with that, and you'll figure it out. And you'll get what I'm talking about. If we go to key and rate, my rate could be adjusted by whatever pitch I'm playing, which is kind of cool. So, almost done. Go to saw wave, saw D. Again, that's a bright wave, right? By default, we said that's really bright. If I want to kind of make it a little more subtle, not so bright, what can I turn on? What effect? Filter. Okay, so I go down here to filter. This is my sound by default. Now we have that. That almost sounds like could be a usable pad almost. So if I turn my filter on, I get a bunch of different filter types. We won't talk about it. Most of you will turn low 12 dB on and it will work just fine for what we're doing. But I can go to frequency and vary this frequency. Right? And it gives me a difference between warm and bright. So again, if we go back to this that we talked about in the beginning, I could set my mod wheel here to filter frequency, which I did. And as I turn that mod wheel, it's going to adjust this amount. Okay? The other thing I can do, what does LFO do? What's our M word? Modulates. I can have my LFO, turn it on, set it to a sine wave, rate of 112, amount 100, turn filter on here, and watch what happens now. It's modulating my volume and it's modulating my filter between bright and soft, okay? So we have those two options, which are very cool. Go to our last section here, which is our pitch section. Two options that well, there's three probably we'll really look at. We can turn this on. It's going to allow spread. This is the word, everyone write this down. Spread basically, to create a really thick sound, it's going to mimic chorus. Okay, so you could write spread equals chorus. But to give us a thicker sound, it's going to essentially kind of duplicate the wave that you have or the sound that you have and detune them from each other and give you this kind of slight modulation or slight chorus to give you a thicker sound. You'll hear exactly what I'm talking about when I do this. Used subtly is a really, really nice sound. Chorus on pads and synths sound great, on guitar not so much. Transpose, that's our like capo kind of. That's almost like adjusting chorus, but instead of oscillators, we're doing the entire thing. Okay. Everyone write the word glide down. And glide is found here. If we click on pitch and we select glide, what musical term is glide associated with? Slide or legato. Yeah, slide is a good guess. So as I go from this note to that note, what's happening? It goes automatically, right? Boom, 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 boom. Now depending on the release, it may bleed into each other. But if I go to pitch envelope and I turn glide on, hear how it's kind of sliding in? Again, that's fireflies. If you hit one note and go to another, it's going to give you that. If we combine that, if we go to our master control here, set our voices to 1, we get this really cool deal where I can hold down this note, and it's always going to go back to that one note.
That's like all Vowel City music.
Exactly. We just debunked the myth of
Oh
Vowel
my
City.
gosh.
So those two effects were what? Glide and one voice, right? So we changed our voice to one, and we turned our glide on. So our glide is gliding between notes. If we're set to one voice, it's only going to play one voice at a time. I can hold down one note, and it sounds killer. Like that makes you want to go write a nice pop song. And that's just two things. Still no effects. The other thing about this, yeah, we'll be done very quick. Again, we can adjust the envelope of this. Okay, so this is a good way to see this, how our envelope works. We can have it start. Our initial pitch is here. We can have it start up and pitch down. We have to turn this on, which is our amount for our pitch envelope. We want it to affect 100%. People that are really good with synth stuff will mess with that, and it gives it more life. It gives it more character instead of just, which sounded cool. Now it's got that initial thing. If you think of, there's some Owl City song that does that. I can't remember what it is, but any synth song is like that. Now we can have it go, start low, pitch up, and then come back down. Right? And that's just messing with that. Still no effects. We're just affecting that initial wave. So that's operator. There's literally, there's like maybe 2 or 3 things that we didn't really talk about. Peak, our end, our loop, if we want that envelope to loop or just play once. But really dig in and mess with it. I know we're way over time, but do you guys have any questions?
What's the difference between transpose and the course thing? Does
Yeah,
it really
transpose is everything. So everything. Course, we only have per oscillator. So I can make this oscillator an octave lower than this one. Or I can go, and when I hit this, everything's up a half step or up a whole step.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. Anything else?
What's time?
I don't know. Put your mouse over it. Tell me what it is. I've never
It's a
messed
global control for all envelope rates.
Yeah, I guess it's like, I think you can delay all your envelopes, I guess, then. Instead of being set to a certain thing. I've never ever messed with it. But again, mess with it. You're going to discover something really cool and show us next week. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. So, that's your homework, okay? Remake those patches. And again, you know what? If you want to make patches from scratch, you can do that as well, too. You're only going to learn operator if you really dig in and do it. And I'll let you guys know, if you didn't necessarily enjoy this class today, this is kind of be a lot of this stuff. Like, when we dig in, we'll do this. We'll do sampler next week. We'll talk about actually sampling like a piano and how we do that and guitar. But after that, we'll talk about how to make pads. When we make pads, we're going to go back to this, and I'll say, should we start with a sine wave or sawtooth wave? And Nia's going to play a pad, and I'll say, adjust the release. And if she goes, I don't know what release is, then I'll say, well, you gotta pay attention to the first class. So if this feels like it's over your head, don't give up yet. But I think most everyone's going to enjoy this because it's so much fun. You can create any sound you want to. And this is the great thing. No effects. This is one instrument among many. Okay? So that's it. Again, make sure you have lots of notes, and you guys are free to go. To turn in your assignment, I need your live file. Do collect all and save. And it's a complete pain in the butt, but do like Google Drive or Dropbox. Just make sure. Some people last semester had issues with submitting things and making sure I had the right permissions or whatever. Try it again. I think most of you guys will have it. If you don't, I'll email you and we'll get it sorted out the first week and we'll be done with it. But submit it through Google Drive or Dropbox and turn it in. And I kind of want to listen to them before class, but Thursday's nice. Do Thursday by 1. Okay, next week, Thursday by 1. And unfortunately, I won't be able to listen to them probably until after class. But Thursday by 1, do that homework, and you're done. If you have any questions, I'll be around for 10 minutes.